With a franchise like Star Trek, for how long it's been going on, it's very easy to feel like, well, the new stuff's good, but I think we're always going to go back to the older things. But every now and then, something from the new era gives you something that is clearly an immediate classic. Ad Astra Per Aspera. This is the second episode of the second season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And it's really, really good. This is quintessential Star Trek, but in many ways refined. It takes something that Star Trek has frequently done, but often done with some hiccups, some imperfections, some stumbling blocks, some accidental things for good or for ill that have happened along the way, and goes about it being really cautious, conscious, and purposeful. Because this is a trial episode. Star Trek's had a lot of those over the years. Probably the most famous up to this point being Measure of a Man from Star Trek Next Generation, which I actually did as part of a double bill review. You can check that out if you want to. But this format of using a trial setting is, again, not uncommon to Star Trek and pretty common whenever there is going to be issues of oppression or rights. And as I said, that topic and this format, both either done jointly or separately, is not uncommon in Star Trek. But the thing is, historically, Star Trek has a tendency to either go a little bit too broad with its attempts to basically go prejudice is bad, which, it is. Let's not get any disagreement on that. But it either goes a little bit too broad, so it's like, yes, I agree, but this doesn't really feel like it's presenting me anything new, and so if I don't already agree with that stance, what am I getting from this? Or it tends to accidentally stumble into things for good or for ill. It can accidentally stumble into certain perspectives, stereotypes, or framings that are actually counterproductive to what it's trying to do. Or it can accidentally stumble into something that would have been great if they'd realized they'd done it, such as with an episode, again, from The Next Generation, where they were trying to design an analog for being gay, but they accidentally created a near-perfect analog for being non-binary or transgender, and clearly by the end didn't realize they'd done that because some of the aspects stumble. Also did a review of that episode if you want to check that out. Here's what's great about this. So we're picking up on the executive officer, on number one, being on trial for being someone with genetic modifications. This is a whole group of people like this, and they are basically not allowed within the Federation because of historical precedent, because of the eugenics wars, which is part of Star Trek history. And also, that's a history that impacts some other existing characters in the show, and that does get brought up. But here's the thing. I'm going to explain how this feels like it was made. And I don't know if this was how it was made, but here's what it feels like. Whereas before, oftentimes, Star Trek has felt like it has gone for either something really broad or just something where the people writing it were stepping a little bit outside of their own understanding and possibly messing some things up when it came to speaking to certain kinds of prejudice, the reason the prejudices exist, and the way it plays out when you're trying to address them. What it felt like here was it was like a room of people, a diverse room of people going, okay, forget the super broad stuff. The show's done that. Let's speak to a much more specific experience that is still applicable to multiple marginalized and oppressed groups. So this speaks pretty specifically to the experience of being part of a marginalized group, but being able to pass for the majority group. Now, there are multiple marginalized groups that this applies to. This can apply to white passing people of color. This can apply to trans people, either who pass as the gender they do actually identify as, or who are closeted and pretending as if they still identify as the gender they were assigned at birth, even though they don't. So there's things like that. There's the notion of religion, beliefs, traditions brought up, which brings into line things like passing off the idea that you do not practice a banned religion and you go about and act as if you believe what everyone else believes, but you have to secretly practice and hold true to your own beliefs outside of the public eye, because if they knew, it would be really bad for you. There's probably even others, but those are the ones that leapt to mind immediately. And the way that this gets laid out, talking about her history and talking about what people like her go through, and talking about how she is clinging to the ideals of what the Federation and Starfleet is supposed to be, and letting those ideals guide her, regardless of the reality, that also speaks to a not uncommon experience, because for marginalized people to look at what a place like the United States, what it's supposed to be, what it claims to be, versus the reality of it, it's a really fascinating cross-section. It's done incredibly well here. And also dealing with the potential resolution of this incredibly well also, because this addresses something that I can't think of Star Trek definitely ever managing to address this, or too many shows at all, actually. Because the way that stories like this tend to end is one of two things. Either the oppressive systems that are in place are upheld, and so we get a downer, and it's like, well, we have to fight to change the system because this is clearly a miscarriage of justice. Or we get, all right, clearly we need to change the system because this is wrong, and moving forward, we're just going to make it better for everyone. This skews much closer to the reality that can happen when an individual who is part of a marginalized group is so clearly not deserving of the punishment they are being lined up for. But those in power and the system itself is not yet ready to revise its view of that group that she is a part of. So instead, it issues a very narrow ruling that applies to her, but can't be taken as a precedent to expand out and apply to the entire group. And that is a lot closer to the reality of what can happen. And as noted a couple of times, while that's not enough, it's a start. It shows the cracks. It shows that the way that the system and the rules as currently laid out are flawed and oppressive. And if you can start with one instance where it clearly falls apart, that what you say these rules are meant to do should not apply in this situation because none of this is accurate to the reality of this person or their actions or their lives. If you can show that one instance, that's a start. That's a crack. That's a chink in the armor where you can start to pry that open wider and get proper understanding and proper placement and recognition for whatever group it is. And as I said, this applies to a lot of different groups, and not in a 100% one-to-one way. Because as I said, there are some specific things cited that bring in the idea of religion. You have a black lawyer defending a white person, and that does bring into mind, if nothing else, given that they are both part of this minority that is being oppressed within the story, that does bring to mind white passing. And as I said, for my own experiences as a trans person, I related to this a lot. And I don't think any of that is accidental. Oftentimes in Star Trek, as I said, it feels like they stumble into things by accident. This all feels so deliberate, so purposeful, and even as so many things are super specific, at the same time, the way that it speaks to the truth of the emotion of these situations is so well done that even certain details that might lean it more towards indicating that it's talking about religion or talking about race or talking about being trans or some form of queer, it speaks so true to a shared sense of misjustice amongst people in those groups that some of the details don't have to be one-to-one for you to still really connect with this. This drills down and speaks to the humanity of people in the face of a system that wants to dehumanize them. And it speaks to the people who point to the rules and go, rules are rules, even though, as demonstrated in here, sometimes those rules are not applied to everyone easily. And you point to those rules when it's someone who you want to have smacked down or punished, but you ignore those rules for other people. Or how going, well, rules are rules. Yeah, but what if the rules are wrong? What if the rules are broken? What if they shouldn't have been the rules in the first place? And it does also, thankfully, acknowledge how some of these things come about. I'm not going to say it justifies it, because this is obviously a fictional situation, and the specifics of, the history of the eugenics wars and genetic modification and all that, that aspect doesn't really map on one-to-one, but it does at least show that there can be a emotionally understandable reason why this kind of treatment is given to these people. But it is still bigotry. And that's the other thing. It acknowledges that people will point to, well, this thing happened as their justification for what they do, but it doesn't let them off the hook. It still points out that's still prejudice and bigotry. Just because you can point to something that happened at one point, the fact that you are taking that to treat an entire group of people, most of whom had nothing to do with what it was that happened, if only because they weren't born yet, but you're still going to treat them as if they were actively involved, that is bigotry. And it doesn't shy away from that. It is able to give that acknowledgement like, yes, we understand where the concerns come from, but they're still wrong. It's so well balanced. It's really good. And I'd already heard pretty good things about this. I'm a little late coming to it. I mean, a couple days late, but I've had a very busy week, if you hadn't noticed. But this is phenomenal. This is a new classic, as far as I'm concerned. And if you have not seen it yet, well, gosh, I hope you have. I kind of talk spoilery stuff, although I didn't go into super specific, so I think you'll still find a lot to take out of this, even if you hadn't seen the episode yet. But what did you think of this one? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living, even if you can't help me out there. Like, share, subscribe are also great, but don't worry too much about it. We take a relaxed attitude around here, so you can come on back next time you need a break. Massive thanks to my Patreon supporters, and in particular, I want to thank Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfullah, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Ruth, Oliver B., Solitary Pictures, Ulrich Bogdan, Melinda Walters, Jen, Leotha Boyd, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Fernabilex the Poodle, Robin Powell, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Kasparov, Adam R.D.L. Taylor, David Hall, Shayla Gourlay, and Rosalind Bennett. Thanks for your support. You can get your name in the credits too if you feel like hearing me possibly struggle with it for several times before getting it right.